All right, folks, very warm welcome to all of you. Good evening. My name is Ryan, and I'm one of the founders at Interview Kickstart. We have an exciting session ahead of us. I am actually going to wait for maybe 2 to 3 more minutes just to make sure that everybody is in. I know there are a bunch of people getting into the broadcast. Folks, just so you guys know, we do these sessions once every couple of weeks. We pick a topic of interest to our community. And we plan to keep doing them in the months ahead. The next one is in a couple of weeks from now. I'm going to quickly lay out the agenda when I get started, but just so you guys know, the questions, right? If you have questions, just put them on the Q&A tab, right? Not on chat, okay? So just be clear, if you have questions that come up through the presentation, please put them on the Q&A tab and we'll take them all at the end. We should start in a minute from now. So just get comfortable, get water, whatever you need, and I'm going to start in exactly a minute from now. All right, folks, I'm going to get started. For those of you who somebody's, I don't know, there seems to be a little bit of an echo. Maybe it's just me. Okay, let's dive into this. All right, folks, once again, for those of you who just joined, very warm welcome. Good evening. My name is Ryan. I'm one of the founders at Interview Kickstart. Super excited to have you guys here today. We have an awesome session planned. Very, very compelling, thought-provoking topic, right? How do you strategize a multi-million-dollar retirement, right? Not just $1 million. How do you strategize a multi-million-dollar retirement? Very pertinent given the times that we are in. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun as we go through this. To begin with, I am going to just introduce myself. Prior to Interview Kickstart, I used to be an entrepreneur in residence at Accel Partners. I was at Accel, which is one of the premier VC firms in the Bay Area for about 5 years. Ran a large e-commerce company before that. I actively invest as an angel investor. Over my career, I worked in both large and small companies, started up, founded a bunch of companies as well, including Interview Kickstart. And so I have a very deep understanding of what it takes to succeed, what it takes to work at both large as well as small companies. And I'm going to bring all that experience to bear today. I am deeply passionate about helping people up-level, just like Soham and everybody at Interview Kickstart is, which is why we do what we do. Quick background of Interview Kickstart. I'm sure most of you already know who we are, but for the uninitiated, we are the world's leading platform to prepare for very tough technical interviews, right? Interviews that you might get at a Google or a Facebook or Amazon or any top company, maybe a Uber, LinkedIn. We have been around now for 6 years, worked with over 5,000 students. We created the idea of a platform for technical interviews. Offers on our platform range from anywhere between $200. Most recently, we had the highest offer that we ever had at $780,000. What separates us, I think, from everybody and everything out there is our deep focus on making you a better engineer and not hacking the interview process, right? So philosophically, our view is very different from the regular hack your way through an interview process, because we fundamentally don't believe it can be hacked. Being hiring managers ourselves, we know that a typical interview at a top company has 5 to 7 rounds with 5 to 7 incredibly smart people, and there is no way that can be hacked. 3 elements make up our process. All our instructors, our coaches, from whom you get classes as well as one-on-ones, are all hiring managers. They're all tech leads. On the career side of things, they are all technical recruiters from the absolute top companies, because unless you have been an interviewer, unless you know the bar, there is no way you can teach somebody else how to make that bar. We teach the curriculum via proprietary power patterns, right? It allows you to solve many questions. Fundamentally, you need to be prepared for unseen questions when you go in for an interview. And so understanding patterns is key. And we have a very structured system. The reality is almost everybody who comes to us is a working engineer. And just to be able to pull yourself out of the gravitational pull of your current job and help you as you move to the orbit of your new opportunity, you need a very strong forcing functions, you need strong structures. A lot more on Interview Kickstart can be gleaned if you sign up for one of our webinars. I do them multiple times a week. You can go on to interviewkickstart.com, sign up, and you'll hear about the course in detail. These are the offers, the companies that people typically get offers from. With that, let's now jump straight in to today's session. Up front, guys, I want to make it very clear that I'm sure you will have questions on Interview Kickstart and on the great work that we do, on the alumni that have gone through the program, on how we can help. I am not going to take any questions on Interview Kickstart today. Today's discussion is really focused on helping you as you think through strategizing for a very compelling retirement, okay? Now, the first question that begs answering is why even think about retirement? Isn't retirement something that is many, many years away, in some cases multiple decades away, right? And my proposition to you guys is that retirement is, in the context that we know of it today, is a figment of the imagination of a time that was built around the Industrial Revolution, right? And it is no longer relevant today in the traditional sense of the word. Traditionally, retirement was about working for 30, in some cases 40 years, depending on the retirement age, and then saving enough money to retire and do what you'd like to do, right? So it was a lot about deferred living. Today, that is no longer the case, especially if you are in the engineering domain, right? Software engineers are uniquely placed, unlike any other industry, to have the ability to retire much earlier. You don't need to wait to 60, 65, right? You have this whole FIRE generation, right? Be financially independent and retire early. Now, let's put that in perspective, right? There is an opportunity today for software engineers to earn more than most people who run very successful small businesses. More than the bankers, more than the consultants, more than the lawyers, right? There is actually no other profession that allows for this kind of earning so far upfront in your career, 5 to 6 years into your working career. This is truly, guys, the golden age for software engineers. If you look at the world's biggest companies, the world's biggest marketing company, Google, the world's biggest hotel company, Airbnb, the world's biggest taxi provider, Uber, the world's biggest store, Amazon, the world's biggest car company, Tesla, valued twice GM and Ford together, right? Tesla has changed the way one thinks about cars. They think about cars as a technology, as a software platform. Fundamentally today, software is not reshaping, it has reshaped the world. And it's only getting more and more as we move along with the coming of AI, big data, so on and so forth. Now, if you consider that most people enter the workforce with strong amount of student debt, and as you move along, you have mortgages, you have credit card debt, you have children's education, and you have a whole bunch of these expenses that you're constantly spending on, right? And you have limited ability to save. All of that can be completely transformed if you take some time and think strategically about what you want to do, how you want to chart your career, and how do you plan for retirement. And that is really what we are going to focus on today. The second question I'm going to ask you, and it's a rhetorical question, is have you actually taken the time to sit back and calculate how much you actually need and want for your retirement? The reason I say this is a rhetorical question is because most people don't do this at all. they almost let it just happen to them instead of planning how they want this to happen. And secondly, the folks who actually do this tend to grossly underestimate how much retirement costs, because they don't keep in mind things like inflation. They don't keep in mind how costs can change very significantly over time. And so from both these perspectives, the fact that you can retire much closer if you are smart about how you chart your career, and the fact that most people don't think about how much they need for retirement, both of these are reasons that you should stop, take a pause, and think about how you would like your retirement to look like, and when would you like it to get started. 3 questions is what I'm going to seek to answer today. And the answer to those 3 questions, in the answer to those 3 questions, lies the ability to strategize a multi-million-dollar retirement. The first question, and I'd say this is an extremely thought-provoking question, and I'll talk about it in the next slide, is who do you want to hire for your career, right? It's a completely different way of thinking, but people who are sharp about planning their career actually think from this lens, as against the more typical lens of who's going to hire me. Once we get through that, we're going to talk about compensation. Usually, most people think about compensation as how much am I earning? That is only one nuance. That is only one lens that you should take to look at compensation. Compensation has a how much, a quantity element to it. It has a timeline element to it. When are you going to get that compensation? And it has a form element to it. In what form is that compensation going to come your way? The third question I'm going to ask is, given the pathway that you take, what can you do in individual pathways to increase your odds of success, right? The answer to the question that we've asked around strategizing a multi-million-dollar retirement lies in answering each of these questions individually first, and then putting it all together. First question, very thought-provoking, right? Who do you want to hire for your career? Almost all of us, and me included, till maybe very recently, 5-6 years ago, used to keep thinking about interviewing at companies, looking for amazing jobs, trying to figure out who's going to hire, what team should I be working in. And then I sat back and I read about something very interesting by this gentleman called Clayton Christensen, right? Clayton Christensen was one of the top professors of strategy at Harvard. And he has this very interesting framework. It's called the jobs framework. He postulates that we hire people and things to do specific jobs for us, right? I've hired Zoom to be able to do this webinar, right? You might hire Interview Kickstart to help you prepare to get into Google. If you think from that perspective, you must choose what company you want to hire. You must actively think about what are your career goals, what are your career needs, and what are your career aspirations. And then sit back and think, hey, what kind of company do I want to hire? Do I want to hire a company that is doing cutting edge work because that's what gives me the kicks? Do I want to hire a company that gives me good work-life balance because I want to spend time with my family, right? Do I want to hire a company that is very close to my house, right? So that I don't spend time traveling? What are your requirements and who do you want to hire? This is diametrically opposite how most of us think. None of us really think deeply about the fact that at the end of the day, I am paying the company much more than the company is paying me, because I am paying the company with my time, which is invaluable. And there is a huge opportunity cost to all your time. Every hour that you work is time away from your family. Every hour that you work is time away from something else that you could be doing. Every hour that you work is time away from traveling, right? And so you fundamentally are paying the company. You are hiring them to do something specific that you might want them to do. even from a compensation perspective, guys, it's important to understand that who you hire is crucial because not all software jobs are equal. One must understand the software pyramid and the fact that in software, much more than almost any other industry, compensation is not defined by the normal distribution, right? Compensation is built on a power law. Now, there is the formation, now well and truly in software, of a clear software pyramid. Basic IT work is at the bottom of the pyramid, product companies at the top of the pyramid, right? Now, you want to be at the top of the pyramid because this is where you get paid incredibly well, you do great work, you work with good colleagues, right? And if you want to strategize for a multi-million-dollar retirement, the only way to do it is to get at the top. However, most people are stuck in the middle, right? As the song goes, stuck in the middle. They're stuck at mid-tier companies, many in consulting or services companies like the IBMs of the world, the Accentures of the world. Many people who started their career, let's say 10, 15 years ago, at that point of time, the top companies were very different from who they are today. They were the Ciscos of the world, the Intels of the world, Qualcomms of the world, maybe the eBays of the world, right? And being at those companies is, again, very unlikely, right? And so the first thing I want to let you know is when you think about who you should hire, the first thing to think about is who you should not hire, right? And you should not hire any of these companies. Because if you are there, there is no way you are going to get to the multi-million-dollar retirement. Now let's take a minute to understand the power law, right? Many aspects of life, right, are defined by the power law. Venture capital, right, defined by the power law. The top 1, 2 companies in any portfolio typically pay for the other 8 or 9 that are spectacular failures, right? Wealth, best example of power law is wealth, right? In any industry, in any facet of life, the richest 1, 2% tend to own more than 50% of the population. Jeff Bezos is worth more than the GDP of New Zealand, right? That's how extreme the power law is when it comes to wealth. With software companies, there is a very strong power law at play. Level for level, same kind of work, same kind of person. You could move from one company to another company, double your compensation, right? We've seen so many examples. We have seen people who have gotten 200, 250K increments, right? Devang, one of our students, right? Moved from Bloom Energy to Roku. He had offers at Facebook as well, right? His increment after he had gotten to a top company was $250,000. That was more than his compensation coming into our program, right? His compensation coming in was 170. And this is something we see all the time. And this is because of the power law. It's because the top companies are flush with cash and they realize that they need the best talent. And so they're willing to pay and do what it takes. This is an internalization that one should make very early in their career, because the earlier you make this internalization, the faster you can get into these top companies, the more you can earn, and the faster you can retire, right? This is why you want to hire the right set of companies for your career. Now, if middle tier companies are not going to help you, lower tier companies are not going to help you, what kinds of companies make up the top level, right? There are, as is fairly obvious, 2 ways that you can fundamentally set yourself up for a multi-million-dollar retirement. There are 2 types of companies that you might want to hire. The large companies, represented by Google, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Microsoft, Apple, Airbnb, Uber, LinkedIn, tons of companies, tons and tons of companies, right? Euphemistically called Faang, but there are many more, like Twitter, all of these, right? There are tons of companies that one would consider large. These are typically public companies or very near IPO, right? The other extreme is the startup, right? The famed Silicon Valley story: get into a startup, get in early, retire quick. These are the two constructs that one can leverage. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run both these through the two questions that we had. And I'm going to try and create a thesis to answer this question. While you can hire these two, what's a better bet? And in what context is one a better bet than the other? Once we have answered that question, I'm then going to move to the next question, which is, all right, depending on which path do you pick, what are some of the smart things you can do to turn the odds in your favor? Okay. Now, before I get to the next question, and we get into understanding how is wealth created in these sets of companies, I want to take a minute and outline the elements of compensation, and then talk about the question in detail. There are three elements of compensation, right? There is cash, which is what you can earn to spend now. There is benefits to help you. And then there is equity. Now, while historically there has been huge fluctuations in all of these between large and, let's say, startup companies, in the last few years, startups have started fighting back, right? Because of the unprecedented amount of venture money brought upon by low interest rates, right? When you have low interest rates, there is cheap money, and that money looks for high returns. Venture capital is one of the highest returning assets, right, when it works. And so there was a flight of money to early startups. As a result, startups were able to fight back in terms of cash. And so cash is really not a differentiator between these two sets of companies. Yeah, I think large companies pay a little bit more, but it is not a wealth creator, the difference, right? Benefits are significantly more in favor of large companies, but again, that is not going to create wealth. What is going to create wealth is equity. And so when you're choosing for retirement, especially, you need to choose keeping in mind equity. How much, when, and how do you want to get paid? In what form, right? How much is obviously the quantum. When is important, because there are elements like equity where there can be a deferred element to payment. And so while on paper you might think you're getting it now, the reality is no, there is a deferred earning. And obviously when there is a deferred earning, there is more risk, right? What form do you want to get paid is essentially, do you want to optimize for cash? Do you want to optimize for equity, right? And at different points in your life, you might want to optimize for different points of things. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through a scenario that I've built, right? Let's call this for the moon sort startup, right? These guys want to go to the moon, and they have just raised $10 million, right? It's a Series A company, very exciting prospects, solid founders. You have just been hired as the VP of engineering, right, at this company. And here is what you have. You have 1% equity. You've come in at Series A, extremely early. The company has just gotten its first round. They're flush with some early money. You have been hired to build the moon sort, right? And for your work, they have promised you 1% equity that is going to vest equally over the next 4 years. You join the startup does really well. The startup now takes 10 years to get to a point where it's going to exit. And this is one of the unicorn startups, right? Not all startups succeed. 95% of startups die in the first year, few die along the way, but this is that one, right, which has now reached unicorn status. You've stuck along, you have built this phenomenal moon sort platform, and now it's time to cash out. The company has an M&A opportunity, and it's got an opportunity to IPO. Founders decide that either way works, and they decide that they're going to go in for this, and they get their $1 billion exit. Employees are happy, you are over the moon, right? You've committed 10 years of your life and it's all worth it, right? Let's peel the onion a bit. While this sounds fabulous, let's look at what happens in reality. And then let's compare this. Your 1% was 1% when you started, when the company was a Series A company. For those of you who are not very clear, Series A is usually one of the earliest checks that you get, pretty much after the first round of angel or seed, right? So it's very early in a company's history. From a venture capital standpoint, when you are coming into Series A, there is still idea risk, market risk, and growth risk, right? What typically happens at a Series A is that you have proved some form of now what's called product market fit, which is a fancy term of saying that somebody is willing to buy and pay, or somebody is willing to engage with your service, right? At that point of time, you have 1%. But along the way, the startup keeps needing more money, right? Startups are cash guzzlers. And so the founders raise a Series B. Then they raise a Series C. Then they raise a Series D. And then they raise a pre-IPO Series E, where the big bankers, the JP Morgans, the Goldman Sachs, come and swoop down because they want to capture pre-IPO private value, right? This is the story for pretty much all startups. And so what happens is, as the newer investors come on board, they all want a chunk of the pie. And early investors will not come in unless they get 20, 25% along the way. Later investors might take 10, 15%, but everybody wants a large chunk right till the last set of folks, the bankers who lead the IPO. And so what happens is there is only one pie. And so as the pie goes more and more to investors, the pie shrinks significantly for founders and for the ESOP pool. And so your 1% equity over a period of time is going to end up at somewhere around 0.2, 0.25% equity. And this is assuming that you have joined as VP engineering, which means you are the most senior engineer for a long period of time. And so what you will end up seeing is that at a 0.2% of $1 billion, you now get a nice fat check of 2 million, right? Great, it's time to celebrate, pop the champagne, go out for a holiday. It's richly deserved after the 10 years of working, right? And it's a large amount of money that most people typically do not get the opportunity to lay their hands on, right? 2 million is significant, even in the Bay Area, even today. But you've spent 10 years. And so, while the 2 million coming in at one point of time is a lot, when you divide it across the 10 years, effectively, one can think of your compensation as having been paid, let's say, $200,000 in cash and $200,000 in equity, or maybe 100, since it's a startup, 100, 150 in cash, 200 in equity. And so the equity value that you've gotten is essentially $200,000 per year, deferred and paid out in year 10. And so one needs to understand the elements that go into this, right? What are the nuances of this earning? The first nuance is that you picked a company that actually exited. We know that 9 out of 10 startups fail. And so risk-adjusted equity value going in is much lower than 2 million, because that 2 million is adjusted against a very high risk. And so when you think about probability, early on, the 2 million risk adjusted is significantly lower. Secondly, you need to pick a startup that is able to get liquidity at all points of time, which means you are dependent on the vagaries of the VC funding cycle. Take a time like COVID, right? At times like this, everybody pulls back And so startups are left holding their pants when the tide comes down, right? And so you must be very careful about what type of company you pick. The startup life cycle, right? And Paul Graham, for those of you who are interested, has developed a very interesting startup life cycle curve, right? And it's part funny, part serious, right? And the reality is, it is a very topsy-turvy curve, and it's a very topsy-turvy journey. So this is a journey not for the faint-hearted. I have started and exited multiple startups of my own, right? I've invested in many startups as investor at Axel and as an angel myself. This is for somebody who's very comfortable with ambiguity, right? You need to be okay with the fact that from day to day, you will not know what's going on. From month to month, from year to year, you might not know whether the company is going to survive in itself, right? And so one needs to keep those considerations. Now, historically, Silicon Valley was the mecca of startups. And so people went to Silicon Valley. They went to all the top tech hubs to try and get an opportunity to work in these startups, because this is where multi-generational wealth was created. Now, this is true today as well for non-engineers. As a non-engineer, it is highly unlikely that you will make this kind of money in any other opportunity. You will not even get paid like this in a large company, because a large company does not give non-software engineers the kind of equity that it gives good software engineers. And so the startup story is very true for the MBAs, the business majors, the finance majors, and for everybody else as being the only option. But this is a golden age for engineers. And so engineers have many other options, right? And so now let's switch to the large company option, right? And let's look at how compensation works there, when do you get it, what forms. The beauty about large companies, and this was not the case even 4 or 5 years ago, is that today you can have terminal levels at these large companies. You don't have to stretch for a managerial role. And at the terminal level, you can earn incredibly well. I'm going to share some numbers now, guys, based on roles that compare with the VP engineering role that we talked about at a startup, right? These are based on offers that we consistently see for folks who have prepared very well and who've gone through the program, right? So this is first-hand information, stuff that we see repeatedly for people who take the time to prepare really effectively. Let's start with an L5, right? At a top company, you should be looking at 300K. Now, comp-wise, I've, for simplicity, kind of split it as 50-50 between cash and equity. One can argue that at the lower levels, it's probably 50-50. As you move up, it's about maybe 40-45 in cash and 60 in equity. But these numbers are very meaningful, right? So at an L5, which one would say is truly an IC role, you have the ability to earn 300K at most large companies, right? Cash and equity, 150, 150. L6, you start having possibly two pathways. For those who are wanting to continue in the IC category, you have the IC role. You can start at that point of time shifting gears and moving into engineering management. Entry-level engineering management, 400, 500K is what we typically see. Cash equity split 250K each. L7 is probably senior staff on the IC ladder and senior manager, right, on the management ladder. 500 to 600K, 300K cash, 300K equity. You move up further, director of engineering. You start managing other managers, 700K plus. I seem to have missed a zero here. It's 350K each. Now, a couple of important points before I explain the characteristic of this sort of earning. Number one, this sort of compensation is not available, like I said, to folks from all backgrounds. It's really only available to engineers. And so engineering actually stands out Because in engineering, you have two opportunities. You have the startup route and you have the large company route, right? In other domains, you only have the startup route to earn disproportionate wealth. The second thing, in engineering, unlike other domains, you don't need to reach for management to get paid significantly, right? You have IC pathways. And in some companies, in some cases, there are ICs who are earning more than the manager equivalent at those levels. This is also very unique to engineering, right? Because that is not the case in other domains, right? Even in a consulting role or a banking role, unless you become an MD or unless you become a partner, which is management, you cannot earn disproportionate wealth. So that is another nuance that is very unique to software engineers, right? The third thing to keep in mind, and that is really at the heart of what we are talking about, is you get significant equity compensation as well, in addition to high amounts of cash. Now, how does this equity work and how is it different from what we talked about earlier? In most public companies, or actually in all public companies, equity that you get is equal to cash. And so, when you look at the characteristics here, the equity component is essentially cash that you can choose to monetize when you want. You could choose to stay invested in the stock, or once you're vested, you can actually exit. And you vest every year. There are refresher grants along the way. Now compare this to what we talked about when we were talking about startups. There, you have to defer for 10 years, right? And you never know what happens, right? Second, not only is it equivalent to cash, if you remain in the stocks, these stocks compound very significantly. In the last 3 or 4 years, maybe more, the Faang set of stocks and the equivalent there have compounded at an annual growth rate of 24%, right? Excluding this year is much more, right? And so these are really the stock market darlings at this point of time. So you don't want to actually pull your money out. Larry Page is better at compounding your money than you are, right? So is Mark, right? So is Jeff Bezos. These folks are better at compounding your money than you are. And so you want to leave your money in there. Tim Cook, right? Reid Hoffman. All these top companies, right? Reed Hastings, I beg your pardon, from Netflix. They are the best money managers out there. And so you want to be remaining in the stock. But you have the option to pull out that money at any point of time, right? Now let's compare these two. Startups, 2 million earned over 10 years when you picked a Series A company, when you joined as VP engineering, and when you negotiated effectively and got 1%. Very few people get 1%, right? Compare that to an L5, L6, L7, L8 role at any of the top companies. You get same, if not more, equity value per year. When and how did this change come about? When did the fame story change? Essentially, it changed with this set of large companies for 2 reasons. The size that these companies have gotten to, Apple at $2 trillion, is unheralded. And so their ESOP pools are worth phenomenally large amounts of money. And so, as the saying goes, you can be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a really big pond. In the large company, while you might have a really small sliver of the equity, the overall value of that equity is just so significant and compounding so fast that that ends up being worth much more than the equity that you would make in a startup. And so the point I want to make here, guys, is if you are thinking about who you want to hire for wealth creation, the answer is actually quite opposite and quite non-intuitive. Because even from an equity construct, you want to be hiring the large companies, both in terms of quantum of payment and the time complexity, to use a algorithm, to use a technical term, right? Time complexity of when and how you can use that money. This has been happening slowly but surely for the last few years. And there are many other forces, right, that have built, have come up to create this. Bottom line, if you want to choose a startup, it is unlikely that the reason should be equity. The reason should be something else. You might have a career aspiration, you might have a career goal, you might want to work in a specific set of industries, you might want to work with a specific set of founders, right? But it cannot be equity. And that is the point I want to make. Equity makes much more sense at large established companies or pre-IPO companies like an Airbnb or an Uber a couple of months ago, right? A couple of years ago, maybe. Now, let's go back to the two questions that we asked. One was the compensation question, which we just answered. The second question is, how do you increase your odds? You are effectively making a trade, right? You are trading your time for money and experience. And so, like any good trade, you want to try and increase the odds, right? And get them in your favor. So let's look at what are the barriers, what are the challenges, what are the things you absolutely want to get right when you take each of these pathways, okay? Like we've been doing so far, let's go with the startup pathway upfront. How do you increase your odds? The best way to look at increasing your odds, and you know, one should learn from the best, is to go with what Charlie Munger says, right? Charlie Munger, for those of you who don't know, is Warren Buffett's business partner and considered by Warren Buffett and Bill Gates as the smartest man they know. You know, he's in fairly good company there, right? Charlie Munger's approach is similar to what I outlined earlier, right? When you are trying to pick something, first figure out what's not going to work, right? And so let's try and figure out the failure points. If you are looking at picking the right startup, let's try and understand what are the elements that go into picking a wrong startup. The wrong startup is a startup which shuts down, right? Because you're not going to get anything out of it. The second thing that you could do wrong is you pick the right startup, but you go too late. And if you go too late, you're not going to get much equity. And so you're not going to get much wealth. And the third mistake that people make is that they try this once, they say it didn't work out for me, and they move on. Picking the right startup and increasing your odds means you need to invert these, right? The first thing to realize is that you need to know how to select, right? And that's a non-trivial task. The best VCs who are in the business of picking and betting on startups have a 1:10 success. 1 out of every 10 picks that they make, 1 out of every 10 investments that they make goes on to yield very significant results, right? And because there's a power law at play at VC as well, that ends up paying for everybody, right? Google would have paid for everybody in the VCs that backed them. Uber paid possibly for everybody at Benchmark, right? Which backed Uber very early. Axel, right, very early in Facebook, paid for everything that we messed up along the way. So first element is you need to find a way, you need to find a via media to learn how to select. How can you pick effectively, right? And so selection is really key. It's, you know, selecting the right startup is actually worth more than anything else because it's a multiply by zero problem. If you pick the wrong startup, you're not going to make anything. The second is figuring out how to pick timing, right? How do you make sure that you get in at the right time? That is relatively easier because you can try and understand the startup growth, their trajectory. You can try and understand which series they are in, earlier the better. An important thing to understand if you want to go the startup pathway, right? And I've been doing this now for 10, 15 years, is it's a repeat game. Even in the case of VCs, right? They invest to learn, and based on their learning, they repeat the process. And in this case, the reason I keep going back to VCs is because you are an investor. You are an investor investing your time, which is the most valuable resource. It is 100 times more valuable than money. And so if you are going the startup route, folks, please keep in mind that this is a repeat game. It's a repeat business. You will probably go through 2 to 3 different types of startups to realize what kind of startup works for you. And so if you are committing to this path, you need to commit to this path for a good 10 years, because you will kind of figure out the early startups, you'll fail in a couple, maybe the first 2, 3 years, then you will hit the right startup, you'll select effectively, and then you'll wait for that 7 to 10 years, right, as it exits. Are there ways that we can be smart about doing this? Yes. Rely on the experts, right? Rely on folks who have figured this out to a great extent. We recommend that if you are looking at startups, you spend a lot of time going through the Wealthfront career launching company list, right? The Wealthfront list is brought about by Wealthfront. The founder of Wealthfront was one of the founding team at Benchmark Capital, phenomenal investor, right? Went on to build Wealthfront, the first large scale, I would say, robo investing platform. Now it's obviously Robinhood. They have picked a bunch of companies, and they do this every year. They have 3 characteristics, 3 traits, right? And each of those traits are important to understand. The first trait is that the companies in that list need to be companies that have revenue of 20 million to 300 million. The second is that they should have a 50% plus rate of growth and a projected rate of growth for the next few years. And the third is they have positive unit economics. Very smart, very compelling traits. Why? Why have they picked this, right? At $20 million plus, you have proven that you have already hit revenue scale. And it's not a trivial, not a small company. It is a relatively meaningful company, and a company that once it has hit this scale has kind of proven that there is a product market fit, and there is a sufficiently large set of people who want to pay for its services. And with any good idea comes a number of ideas that are close to it, right? And so 20 million is typically the breakout point when you know that this company is well set to now grow. The second is rate of growth, right? The reason they've picked rate of growth is because that is when equity compounds very significantly. And so if you're getting in early, you're getting in it for equity. And the third is positive unit economics. The reason positive unit economics is extremely important is because then you are not dependent on the vagaries of the current climate in investing. The business has enough of cash flow, and so it's not dependent on VCs. The other reason why positive economics is very useful is going back to what we talked about earlier. When you have strong positive economics, your dilution is much lower because you stand out from other companies. And more importantly, the business generates cash, right? And the best businesses are funded by customers. The best businesses are not funded by investors, right? And so as you move along, if you have solid positive economics, you start moving from investors to customers funding your business, right? And so you don't need to raise more. You don't need to raise more money. This is what you need to keep in mind, guys, if you want to increase your odds. Pick right. That outweighs everything else, right? It's like when you're investing in a stock market, right? People try and figure out which particular stocks to invest in. Smart investors focus all their time on asset allocation. Because once you get your asset allocation correct or in sync with what you want to do for your retirement, what happens below that is less important. It is exactly the same here. You want to select right, you want to try and get into right timing, and you want to realize that this is going to happen multiple times, use the wealth front set of companies to look at and talk to folks who are in this space, right? Usually, to be able to find the right company, you need to have great access. And access comes not by serendipity, right? Access comes by working on it, because then you know which are the hot startups, what makes sense, which space, and you start focusing there. How do you increase your odds at large companies, right? Completely different. You don't need to worry about a wealth front list. You know, right? These are all publicly listed companies. They have all their filings. It's fairly obvious, right? There are many, many more data points and metrics to use. But the challenges of large companies are really getting in. And once you get in, how do you get promoted? That is essentially, right? Or maybe three sets of problems. How do you get in? When you're getting in, how do you negotiate effectively? And once you're in, how do you get promoted, right? Those are the three things to keep in mind with large companies. Needless to say, preparing for interviews tends to be the equivalent of selecting the right startup. Because unless you prepare really well, you're not going to get in. Now, what most people don't realize is that actually an interview is a decider for four things, not just do you get in or not. The first thing that companies will do is they'll use the interview process as a binary elimination. Yes, no, get in, no, 0, 1. So first is interviews are to make sure that you get in or don't get in. The second thing interviews are useful for is what level are you getting in at, right? Are you getting in at an L5, L6, L7, L8, what level? Leveling becomes crucial. Third, once they've decided to get you in, once they've decided the level, they are then deciding the band. The same level can have a difference of 100 and 150K between two sets of folks. And the fourth is it's used for negotiating, right? Making sure that you prepare really well sets you very well for negotiations. And the beauty is you don't need to take an inordinate amount of time to prepare, right? It's a few months of focused effort to try and earn these sort of crazy compensation numbers. Once you're in, you need to figure out how you get promoted if you want to get promoted, right? Remember, one of the unique things that we talked about in large companies is that you don't necessarily need to go the management track to earn. You could stay an IC, you could stay at an L5 level at a 300K, you could choose to keep moving up. Now, one of our upcoming sessions is going to be on what you need to do to get promoted. So I'll stay away from that. I'm going to stay away from interview prep as well. For those of you who want to understand that in more detail, sign up for one of our regular webinars. Right there, we talk about the typical interview prep framework. What we don't talk about too often is negotiations, right? And so I'm going to take a couple of minutes to talk about negotiations and tell you, if you are applying, what are some of the tricks and tips that we advise our students on, and what have yielded, which of these, I beg your pardon, have yielded phenomenal outcomes. The first thing to keep in mind is what we already covered. You cannot negotiate effectively unless you've had a stellar interview performance. The interview performance is essentially you are compelling, you are creating a compelling case, right? Second, not well thought of, is how do you schedule your interviews? Now, it might seem very trivial because like, hey man, why do I need to schedule my interviews to negotiate effectively? The truth is, this is where most people make mistakes. In your enthusiasm, most people will interview at their favorite companies first. That's a rookie error. What you want to do is you want to build to your favorite company, because you get better as you keep interviewing, right? Now, there is a point at which you should be hitting your top companies, because this is like the Laffer's curve. At some point of time, you get diminishing returns on practice. But you want to build up. First practice, then tier 3 companies, then tier 2 companies, then your favorite companies, right? If you want to negotiate effectively, you need to get competing offers. That's what gives you leverage. But competing offers are not good enough. You need to have competing offers from similar companies or companies that these large companies are worried about you going to. If you want an offer at Facebook, it's great to have an offer at Google. If you want to have a Google offer, it's great to have an offer at Facebook. If you want to have a Facebook offer, it's great to have an offer at Snapchat, right? Because it's a good, compelling, similar company. Netflix is a phenomenal company to get offers from, very high in cash. You can use that to negotiate everywhere else, right? So planning your interview process, not only in terms of making sure that you start going from lower to better companies, you plan your interview process to make sure that you're interviewing at similar companies, and you plan your interview process to ensure that you're getting offers from those companies at a similar time. Because it's very difficult to get a compelling offer and tell the company, I want to wait for 1 month because my next interview is a month and a half away or a month away, right? That's not going to give you leverage. You will have to make a decision without having other opportunities. So scheduling, working through similar companies, being deliberate about your application process is crucial. Now, let's say you've ended up at Google. You are interviewing. You've interviewed at a bunch of other companies. You've done your homework. You know, which is the last point, what are the bands at each level. What can make a difference is if you know how to pick which team, right? When we think of large companies, we think of them as one uniform company. But the reality is, like the colors in the Google logo, each team is a different color, different flavor. And there are different teams that the company is investing in at that point of time. If you want to get the truly off the charts offers, you want to try and figure out, by talking to folks in those companies, what teams are currently teams that the company is investing very heavily on. Because the company is diverting a lot of cash to those teams, right? And so, if you prepare well, you have a good interview, you schedule well, you leverage similar company interviews, you know what are the levels that people are paying at, and then you pick the right team, you will get a phenomenal offer, right? These are the kind of things that we teach all our students, right? This is why career prep and thinking about how to accelerate your career it's not good enough to think only technically. You have to think about career skills as well, right? And so this is how you increase the odds. You increase the odds by preparing a solid resume, preparing for interviews, knowing how to negotiate, knowing how to lay out your interview process. And then once you're in, which is the subject of a future MicroClass, learning how to work to make sure that you are promoted, right? So this is what I postulate before we end, guys. While historically, it was certainly weighted in favor of startups, today the world has changed. And this is actually cyclical, right? In the late 90s, it would have been phenomenal for you to have worked in startups. Amazon, Google, all of them came up at that point of time. 2007, 2008 as well. Uber, Airbnb, bunch of really good companies got founded at that point of time, right? But the cycle keeps changing. And today the cycle is well and truly weighted in favor of large companies. And if you want to make a bet, because you are paying with your time, and if you want to hire a company for a multi-million-dollar retirement, I postulate today that it is much better to hire a large company. We've talked about equity and how at large companies, you actually end up making more equity than at a startup, even if you were that VP of engineering in a top startup, which ended up succeeding. Top companies are much more stable. They are getting larger, which means that equity is getting more and more valuable. Their equity is compounding over time. Today, these companies have grown so large. They have so much of data that it is very difficult to compete against them, because data is the new oil, right? And so moving forward, at least for the next few years, it looks like the most innovative ideas are likely to come out of larger companies, especially in tech. Look at the world's largest startup in the last couple of years. The world's largest startup that most people don't think of as a startup has actually come out from the world's largest company, well, now world's second largest company, Amazon. And that startup is AWS, right? So these large companies have some of the largest startups coming up within them. What these companies have done, which none of the earlier companies have been able to do, is that they have been able to keep the startup DNA working right through, because most of them are founder-led. From time to time, there are these freak moments that cause a seismic shift. COVID is one such moment. What is happening as a result of COVID is there is a large, significant flight to safety, both on talent and in funding. And large companies are that flight to safety. So, COVID has doubled down on a trend that was already taking place. The fact that large companies are now weighted much more strongly in terms of a successful career. Just to play devil's advocate, right, and throw a twist in the tale, the one thing to be aware of is usually in moments of depression, moments of recession, you see some of the world's most innovative companies being founded. And so the counter argument to all I've said is that historically, in periods like we are going through right now, you see some of the world's most innovative startups being built because you see new areas of demand. Some areas that you might want to be looking at if you are considering this: healthcare, education, remote working, communications, to some extent, gig economy, and SaaS players. These are places where COVID has created many new opportunities, some of which large companies will take. Health education, one can argue that large companies are much better placed to take, but some of the others, right, you might find nuanced, very interesting small companies, right? With that, folks, let's wrap up and look at what we learned today, right? I think we're a minute over time, 2 minutes over time. It's important to think about retirement because it can be much closer than you think. If you plan effectively, you can cover things like debt, student loan, mortgages well in advance. Think about what company you want to hire. Who are you going to hire for your life? Important question, compelling question, something that you should be spending time thinking about. The sooner you get to that answer, the sooner you know what pathway you need to go, the sooner you can work on increasing your odds, the sooner you can retire. To be well remunerated as a software engineer and take advantage of this golden era, make sure that you push yourself to get to the top of the pyramid. Don't get stuck in the middle. That's really not going to get you what you want to get. It does take some amount of effort to move yourself out of your current inertia, but it's much easier than you might think. It takes a couple of months of preparing for interviews. It takes a couple of months of researching startups. It takes a couple of months of deliberate effort. Equity creates wealth. Cash pays the bills. Equity buys the house. Equity buys children's education. Equity buys a phenomenal retirement. And so when you are thinking, think equity. Two ways to get equity: startups, top companies. Today, the way the environment is set up, you will likely earn more equity from the large companies than you will at a startup. You will earn that money every year, so it's not deferred. That money is highly liquid. It is just like cash. And Larry Page is doing a phenomenal job compounding that for you. Either ways, these are great opportunities. Whichever place you want to invest your time, you want to increase your odds. If you're looking at a startup, selection is more important than anything. Make sure you get selection right. The Wealthfront guide is one example of how you can select effectively. Figure out how you can get access right? Get into those networks. Once you've selected right, make sure you've picked the company at the right time and realize that you'll probably go through 2 or 3 cycles before you end up at the right company. The challenge with large companies is really interviewing. While this was a black box a few years ago, and while this has certainly gotten much tougher, today it's a lot like competitive programming. The beauty is these interviews are actually accessible to everybody. Companies have now realized that they need you to prepare. They send out prep material for you to go through. And the way the interview process has evolved, and it's something obviously we know in great detail, is that it has really evolved for the best prepared engineers, right? The demand for engineering talent is so significant, especially at the top companies. The demand far outstrips supply. And so for the next foreseeable future, the next 5, 10, probably 15, 20 years, you are going to have extremely compelling offers because the demand at these companies far outweighs the supply. And that is because there is an underlying shift that we are seeing right now. We have entered, as Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum says, we have entered the 4th industrial revolution, which is a revolution of data. It's a revolution of chips. We are just getting started. We are at the start of the start. And so there is going to be an unheralded opportunity for the next few years, especially for software engineers. The point I was making, guys, is as a software engineer, you have these 2 opportunities. No other domain, no other industry has these other opportunities. In every other domain, you have to go to a startup to own equity to create those exit opportunities for yourself. As a software engineer, in this golden era, you have choices. Choose wisely. Hire the right company for your career. With that, folks, I come to the end of what we had to cover today. Thank you very much for your time, for your consideration. I'm now going to take questions. The way you ask questions, guys, is there is a Q&A tab. Just click there, write your question, and I'd urge you to all take a minute to upvote questions, right, so that we can get the most important questions answered. Feel free to follow me. Feel free to follow us on all the social channels. We are constantly posting about software jobs, software careers, interview prep, whole bunch of interesting stuff. Please follow us online to learn about stuff that we post and to learn about upcoming sessions that we might come up with, right? Okay, I'm now going to actually start looking at the Q&A. I think there are people who have messaged on chat, guys. If there are questions, could you please put them on on the Q&A platform so that I can start answering questions as well. Okay. Okay. So we have, I think, 10 open questions. Okay. I'm going to go step by step and let me get going. Hold on. We go back to the slide view. Okay. I'm just going to make sure that I keep the last slide open, guys, so that you can keep looking at the learnings. Bear with me for a second. Yeah. Craig, okay. So I'm going to read out the question, guys, and then I'm going to keep answering them. Good. I see a lot of people are upvoting questions, so that's very, very good. There are new questions coming up, guys, so please take time to keep upvoting questions. Craig says, hey, on an average, how long do you recommend working in a company before looking for new opportunities? Extremely good question. My feeling is if you stay in one particular tech company for too long, there is a tendency to plateau and stagnate. Long term, you can miss out on innovative rising companies, which might affect your long-term financial benefits and retirement nest egg. Excellent question, Craig, right? So question is how long? Now, there is no standard answer, but typically what we would advise and what we see, based on just empirical observations, is about 3 to 4 years, right? And it's interesting why. There are multiple reasons. In 4 years, you've usually seen one cycle. In 4 years, most of your equity is vested, right? And then you're looking for refresher grants. And so that is typically the amount of time, 4 to 5 years, I would say, right? You get to see one cycle. You've created enough of let's say presence in the company. You've probably gotten promoted 1 or 2 times. You've earned your equity over a period of time, and it's possibly time to move on. You are absolutely right in that you might plateau. There might be interesting opportunities coming up at other companies. And so you should certainly be on the lookout every, let's say, 4, 5 years. If you feel the company is stagnating, maybe a little slower, a little sooner, right? But 4 or 5 years is typically what we see, right? And it meshes very well with the fact that you would have vested all your equity at that point of time. Mac has asked the next question. Once you've joined these top companies, what strategies can you use to maximize your total compensation growth? Should I focus on getting promoted, or should I move to other top companies every 2 years? Great question, Mac. These are actually the 2 strategies to increase your comp. It is likely that you will get a disproportionate increase in comp when you move companies, right? Or when you get promoted, right? You know, just staying at the same level while you can have terminal equity, terminal earning at 300, 400, 500K. Obviously, everybody's, you know, keen to try and grow. Now, in terms of should you move every 2 years? No, I think 2 years is too soon, right? Like I was mentioning to Craig's question, you want to be trying to stay in a place for at least 4 years, unless you think it's really not working or you get a phenomenal opportunity, right? If you want to increase your total compensation within the company that you're at, you have to get promoted, right? It is very difficult to increase your compensation at the company without getting promoted, right? I won't dive into what you need to do to get promoted. That's a separate session that we are going to do. But I'm going to use this to answer an adjacent question, right? And that question is essentially the way you maximize your total compensation is really by negotiating before you get in, right? Because your increments are based on your previous comp. So if you've done a bad job of negotiating, if you've done a bad job of nailing the interview, then what's going to happen is at the same band, you will probably earn much lower than, let's say, Craig, who might be at the same band, right? And your increments before your promotions are on those levels. And your promotions also will keep considering your previous band, right? So making sure that you interview well and that you negotiate well is really the best way to set up good compensation at the company that you're at, and then negotiate when you move to another company, okay? But long story short, if you want to increase compensation within the first 4 years, it's probably better to get promoted in the company that you're at. If you feel you're stagnant, you move to another company. Moving companies typically ends up giving you better increments, right? But you don't want to be moving too often. I would say 3 to 4 years is a good amount of time, right? How do we calculate how much we need? That's a really, really good question. Now, it's very person specific, right? I can tell you that that number is likely to be upwards of a couple of million for sure, right? And there are multiple factors, Bardia, to keep in mind. One is, what's your current cost of living? What is your future cost of living, right? Second is obviously keep in mind inflation, right? How does inflation work? Third is you want to keep in mind, is your spending pattern going to change, right? And that can be, for example, kids having to go to college, right? That can be a significant investment. So keep in mind things like this. There are actually many platforms, many tools online that you can use. They'll ask you some basic questions. Usually a good financial advisor is a good person to talk to. But essentially keep in mind what your current level of spending is, what your current lifestyle requires. Do you see that lifestyle changing? And how does inflation work? It's that simple, right? The fourth thing you need to keep in mind, and that's, I would say, less often considered, is timing, right? How soon or how late in your career do you want to retire? Obviously, if you want to retire earlier, then you have less working years, more non-working years. And so you need to plan your retirement accordingly, right? Most people save for their retirement by investing in 401ks. That's really not enough. You need to do a lot more. Sai has actually sent a message on chat, which you guys could look at. It says, he says use personalcapital.com. It's, he seems like that's something you can use. I've not used it, so I don't know what it's like. But I would say these are the 3-4 things. What's your current level of spending? Do you anticipate that changing? Keep in mind inflation. And at what point of time do you want to retire, right? And then you can, as a discerning engineer, you'll be able to do the math. What about product managers at top companies? Is that comparable? Yes and no, Miri. TPM is comparable, but only at the top companies. Regular product manager, no. Regular, project manager, not at all. A product manager is comparable, but a TPM, I beg your pardon, a TPM is comparable at the top companies. Now, at a top company, at a Google or a Facebook or any of the tier 1, maybe tier 2 companies, a TPM role is very similar to an engineering manager role, right? The interview process is very similar as well. You will need to prepare on algorithms, data structures, system design, just like typical engineering manager would need to do. And the comp is pretty much the same as well. But that is only in the, I would say, tier 1, some of the tier 2 companies. Across the board, no, engineering gets paid much, much more, right? Abe says LinkedIn is very hit or miss in terms of referrals, seems to be the best way to go. What is the best way to apply to a company if we don't have a referral? You're absolutely right, Abe. LinkedIn is completely hit or miss. I would say one of the reasons we have such tremendous success at Interview Kickstart is because of now we've built a base of 5,000-6,000 alumni. And so it's very easy for us to refer, right? And so you might find networks like this, right? That is a very underappreciated element of Interview Kickstart. We don't publicize it as well. We have instructors from all of these top companies. We have very large alumni, pretty much working in all teams, all companies. And that is the best way to get into a top company, right? Because you'll be taken much more seriously. I would say the answer to your question is, may not be what you want, but find a referral, right? Take the time, join a network, join a program, spend some time reaching out to folks. Referral is your best way. Now, if you don't have a referral, there are specific ways you can go about it in terms of crafting emails, reaching out to folks, LinkedIn, direct applying, but they all tend to be much, much lower probability of success. Referrals is your best bet, right? And there is really no other way that you should be thinking of. Lakshmi, next question is off topic. Do you provide help and offer negotiations for a person interviewing locations outside the US, the people who went through the... Okay, Lakshmi, this is a this is more an interview prep question. And so, I said that I'm not going to take any of those questions. Yes, we provide negotiating support, right? And negotiating support, how you negotiate is pretty same wherever you are in the world. We have students who've done the course from India, a lot from Europe, South Asia, Singapore, Sydney. The interviews are the same, right? Across the world, because it's the same top companies, the same Faang sets that is really hiring aggressively. Okay. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Krenis, I think. Krenis Lin. What if you are not a software engineer, more in data science? I heard that the average data science is 8.5 years experience. I'm over 40 and I work longer. Aren't most Faang company people younger? So Krenis, yes, I mean, people are typically younger in these companies, but I don't think that's a concern at all. I mean, I'm 40. Right? I think I'm a spring chicken. I think I'm just getting started. I don't think companies care about age, dude. We have had students who have been 47, 48, 53. Jody is our oldest student, right? Ganesh, one of our best coaches, right? He did the course at about 46, 47. It really makes no difference at all. Age is really a figment of your imagination. The demand for engineering is so much that if you can fundamentally prove that you can solve problem-solving questions in an interview, nobody's going to give a damn about your age, dude, right? And 40 is not old at all. In terms of data science, yes, I would club data science within the same set of roles, right? So software engineering, TPM at top companies, data science, cloud, all in the same, big data, right? All in the same realm, right? And so these are all opportunities, all places where you can earn very well, right? So data science is fine. Don't worry about the average age. Averages can be very misleading. It's like saying that the average income is X. Jeff Bezos is here and somebody who's on social security is here, right? So averages are not really good indicators. Median is probably a better indicator. But the fact of the matter is that age doesn't matter when it comes to this, right? And data science is a space where you can fundamentally earn similar to how you earn at traditional engineering roles. Product manager, are we LinkedIn, this topic? Prabhakar says, how do you postpone interviews? Normally they don't give you much time. So again, I would say edge of where we are, but I will answer this question. So never interview when you're not ready. It's a horrific idea. And there are two very specific reasons why you should not interview when you're not ready. The first is if you fail an interview, you will have to wait for anywhere between 18, maybe 12 to 24 months, right? 18 months. Now, typical increments that we see, right? Median increments about 10K, 8 to 10K. If you keep that in mind, that you need to wait for 12 to 18 months, you are basically screwing up and leaving 150K on the table. And if you're still okay to swallow that, the bigger reason not to interview when you're not ready is the fact that you will get 2 chances to interview at a top company in your career, maybe 3, right? And so you got to treat these like gold dust. Now, how do you postpone your interview? You actually write to the recruiter. You write to the recruiter and be very honest. Tell the recruiter that, hey, I'm extremely excited about this opportunity. Google is one of my favorite companies. And so I want to take the time to really prepare well. Give me a few months and I'll get back to you. Couple of things in that. One, tell them that you want to prepare. They will appreciate it. They will realize that they should give you the time because otherwise they're wasting good engineering time on you when you're not prepared. Secondly, never tell them a fixed amount of time. You tell them that you want a couple of months, because if you give a fixed amount of time, you are putting a gun to your head, which is not smart. Now you could get back in 1 month, 2 months, that's fine. The risk is that you lose that opportunity. That is a completely unfounded risk, especially at top companies. Facebook has recently come out saying they're going to hire 10,000 people, I think a month and a half ago. And that's in the rest of this year, right? That's a crazy amount of hiring, right? And all companies, all top companies are like this. It's very unlikely that you will lose out on that position. Now, the rule is different if you're going for a startup. If you're going for a startup, before you postpone the interview, you should talk to the recruiter and ask them if this is a specific role. Can they wait or not? Because startups are usually much smaller. And so the delay tactic for a large company is very acceptable, very possible to do, not an issue. The delay tactic for a startup needs to be very nuanced, needs to be thought of in function of how many people that startup is hiring. And there you should be talking to the recruiter before you make this decision. Okay. Sai has a question. I'm just going question by question that says, do you still see this trend for the next decade? I'm 40, missed out on software engineering track, which is my true calling. I've been in consulting world for the last decade, not made MD yet. TPM is a viable path. Yes, I see this path not only for the next 10 years, I see this path actually for the next many. I think that this is the path that's going to continue for my entire lifetime, right? And I'm 40, I plan to live to 120. So, this is going to be there for ages to come. We are seeing a complete shift, guys. Right? And we have not seen this in our lives. The only time this has happened actually ever is 300 to 400 years ago, right? Which was the start of the Industrial Revolution. With the Industrial Revolution came as a result of Isaac Newton's laws, right? Isaac Newton's laws of motion, eventually the development of the steam engine, the electric coil, right? And it kept going on, the scientific method, right? And that has lasted for 400 years, right? It has lasted for multiple lifetimes, right? That's what's happening in tech. We are seeing a completely new way of working, of thinking, of entrepreneurship, of the factors of production, right? And so I see this lasting certainly for all our lifetimes, right? Every company is going to become a software company. Every child is going to learn how to code, right? It's going to be like English or like language skills, right? If you don't know it, it's going to be like math. Everybody has to know it. And so I absolutely see this continuing for the next multiple years. If you are not a software, okay, I've already answered that question. How important is past experience on projects for top companies? Yes, to some extent it is important, right? Obviously, switching domains is tougher than moving in your same domain, but I think people overemphasize this. What you'll realize is there are very interesting ways to tell your story, right? So I would say more important than what past projects you've done, Islam, is figure out how to tell that in a compelling way, right? That's why we have these one-on-one career sessions in our on our platform, right? Because we realize that people can't tell their story very effectively. You know, I run webinars to impress upon people the need to prepare for interviews multiple times a week, right? And I've been doing this now for multiple years. I'm always curious to understand who's attending my webinar that day, right? And how can I serve them better? How can I help them better? Regardless of whether they join Interview Kickstart or not, right? My calling is to help people up level. It's like, you know, Elon Musk's job is to make sure that we reduce spend on fossil fuels. He doesn't care if Volvo comes up with a electric car. He celebrates them, right? I'm very happy if you join Interview Kickstart, but I'd be even happier if you prepare well for interviews, right? What you need to do is tell your story effectively. When I look at people who are attending my webinars, half the time I don't find them on LinkedIn, and I'm taking time to go and find by name, right? So how you tell your story is almost as important, if not more important, than what you've done in terms of projects. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. From an interview perspective, problem solving, being good at algorithms, data structures, and system design is the power skill. That is what companies are looking for. People change domains, right? How do you compete with somebody who doesn't have, who has background in a domain and you don't? And you see so many people changing domain. All you need to do is be really good at problem solving, right? Essentially, as a software engineer, guys, you should think that there are 3 sets of skills that you need. First set of skills is that you learn in university. Second set of skills is typically what you learn in your day job. But the power skill, right, the monetization skill is problem solving. Why? Because companies are doing newer things. Technology is changing so fast. There are new coding languages coming out, right? The pace of change is so significant that only if you can problem solve can you work effectively in a top company, right? And so that is what you need to be keeping in mind. Past projects, yeah, kind of to some extent, but if you want to get into a top company, the barrier, the tough skill is problem solving, right? That's what you need to work on. Jaydeep says, is age a real bias? The only way to escape it is that I know of is moving to management, but what if I want to remain IC? No, Jaydeep, not at all. Age is not an issue. People think it's an issue. It's not an issue. If at all, it's a really small issue in very few companies and very few teams. I would completely remove that from your thought process, right? Like I said, we've had students of 47, 50, 53, all done this. And you don't need to move to management, right? Let me actually go back to that slide, right? And that is why I wanted to put up that slide. In engineering, you do not need to move to management for you to, sorry, I'm going to have to get to that slide. Engineering in particular, you do not need to move to management to earn incredibly well. You can have IC roles. You can terminate your career at an L5. You could move to an IC role at L6, at 7, L8. There are 2 parallel careers, right? Staff engineers, senior staff engineers, principal engineers, all ICs, dude. You don't need to move into management, right? And that is one of the unique things about the software domain in particular, right? What revenue makes it a top company? Is Atlassian a top company? Yeah, Atlassian, I would say it's not in the same league as the Faang or Uber or LinkedIn or Airbnb, any of those companies, but Atlassian is a good company. It's a good company. They pay very well, right? And they have some phenomenal products. The way to think about this is a top company is a company that values software engineers. It's typically a product company it's typically a company that's growing very fast. Atlassian is there, right? Felix says, the equity numbers that you've shown, are they for large companies per year or vested over 4 years? No, this is per year, guys. So when I say that when I say that, let me take a recent example, right? One of our students, Ashu, got an offer of $780,000 recently, month and a half ago, coming out of IK. Ashu had failed multiple interviews before the program. This $780,000, if memory serves me right, was about 350 of cash, and the remaining close to 400 plus $430,000 was equity vested per year, right? So this is all per year numbers. It's not vested over 4 years. It's 150K, 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 and 150K, right? That is why these companies are so compelling, right? Raja says, hey, you didn't cover promotions. Yes, Raja, I consciously didn't cover promotions. There's not enough time. And promotions is a whole different session, right? We'll probably be doing that in the next couple of sessions. I'm going to quickly, I'm going to wrap this up, guys, because we are already half an hour into this, but I want to just see if there are any other questions in Q&A that are very compelling and that I should answer. How do you succeed in becoming this information? Okay, I think we've kind of gone through most of the key questions. Some questions I may not have been able to answer. I apologize. I want to thank you all for your time, guys, right? I want to thank you all for your time. Do think about who you want to hire for your career. You are investing your time. You want to make sure that you get the biggest bang for your time, and you want to make sure that you keep increasing the odds and making them in your favor, right? I want to thank you all for your time. I do hope this was useful. If it was useful, please write to us. Let us know this was useful and why it was useful, right? Either write to start@interviewkickstart.com or operations@interviewkickstart.com, or you could even write to me, Ryan@interviewkickstart.com. Let us know if this was useful, what you enjoyed about it, maybe what other topics you'd like us to discuss. We'd love to hear from the community, and we'd love to be able to actually spend time on topics, on sessions that really matter to all of you. And they don't necessarily need to be about interview prep. You could ask us to talk about promotion. Seems to be one thing that you guys are interested in. Maybe you want to learn about specific technologies. Maybe you want to learn about specific companies. Please do let us know. It allows us to set up sessions that are valuable to each and every one of you, right? And if you do want to look up Interview Kickstart, please register for one of the upcoming webinars. That is really how you learn about the program in detail. I didn't take some of the questions on interviewing and Interview Kickstart because I do want to make sure that this is more about helping you guys in your career than telling you to come and prepare. There is plenty of opportunity for that. So please take the time to register for one of our upcoming webinars if you're interested. Thank you very much, guys. Have a wonderful evening, and make the most of the fact that you are in possibly the best paying sector, the best paying industry, the best paying career that has ever existed, right? Thank you very much, folks. Have a superb evening. Good night. Cheers. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.